Leigh Steinberg is a lawyer, sports agent, and philanthropist. He was the inspiration for the movie Jerry Maguire and has represented the NFL's #1 draft pick 8 times, which is a record. He currently represents 3-time Super Bowl champion Patrick Mahomes. Thanks for doing the show.
My pleasure.
If there were a WNFL, would it make you as horny as it makes me?
I think we like women in action.
Yeah. Why do you think football replaced baseball as the largest sport in America?
I think that the timing and its growth with television, it grew up with television. The right camera angles, the right sequences of time fit into the package. That's first. It has collision, which people like. It's got contact, which people like. And the leadership's been really clever in terms of memorabilia and merchandising, and also it's been on the forefront of different ways for fan involvement. So it's, fantasy sports and gambling, how you use the stadium, how to have a jumbo scoreboard, how to have premium seating, how to have luxury boxes, how to have advertising. It got the advantage of fantasy and the fact that 40 million people a week play fantasy football. And
so who do you attribute that direction to?
A lot of it's leadership in the league. It's forward-looking owners. It's the Bob Krafts and Jerry Jones in football. Now I worry that the Gen Z will have a rougher time staying in the stadium for 3.5 hours if there's a lot of dead time.
Right.
So I think we're going to have to be cognizant of that.
So they'll speed up the game and it'll all be 2-minute drill?
Well, they used to say that fantasy sports was football without, that like the AFL, the Arena League, was football without the boring parts. And, but no, I'll give you an example of how you could do this. I came up with the idea for an app. And you've got a whole generation used to using their phones. Now, when that generation sits in a stadium or arena, and sees instant replay, all the action stops, you've got nothing going on in the stadium, it's just dead time. They're not real great with that. They need more stimulation and involvement.
So have 2 games going simultaneously in the same stadium.
That would be interesting. But no, what you would do is you'd have an app, and down one side on the phone would have your gambling stats, and down the other side would have your fantasy bets. And it would have the capacity to text, so you can talk smack to people in or out of the stadium. And we'd let the fans vote on one play call a game that the coach had to call, and we'd let them overturn one play call. And we'd allow them an unrelenting diet on their phone of other games, of puzzles, quizzes, everything that eventually monetizes. So we'd give them more activity.
Wait, so they would actually be allowed to overturn a call?
Yeah.
So the fans would have a genuine impact on the play?
Yes, they'd have a vote. They could only use it sparingly, but they would get to use it once a game.
Do you ever think like ancient Mayans used to play sports using human heads?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of TV deal could you see being built around that?
That's funny. A big one. The truth of the matter is that people watched executions from the beginning of time. They seem to have a fascination with that, and they have a modern game played in the Far East where they use the cow head or the horse head for the ball.
We enjoy punishment.
We go back to the Coliseum.
There was something interesting you did with your first client, Steve Barkowski, who's your friend from college, and you were negotiating. He was the #1 pick in the draft to the Atlanta Falcons, and he was having trouble with the negotiations, so he asked you to take over as his agent,
yes.
Which is a great origin story for you. Now, while you're negotiating his contract, one pitch that you made to the Falcons is that you would lower his contract demands if they lowered ticket prices.
Yes. Even though that was a flawed concept because they're not supply.
They're not related necessarily.
Yes, they're a function of supply and demand. Still, I thought that players need to be empathetic for the fact that the whole premise exists of professional sports around getting someone to desperately want to watch on TV and do the rest of it, and the fan's the ultimate employer.
But I wanted to investigate your head when you were doing that move, because I felt like there was a bit of cynicism behind it.
Well, there wasn't. There was really more naivete behind it, because the truth of the matter is, I didn't know if I was going to continue being a sports agent. I was just reacting as a fan. And I always thought if a player would offer to take less, if tickets were less, I wasn't thinking as a sports agent. I was thinking as
a regular human.
Yeah, I was just a fan.
Interesting. Who was the best front office negotiator you ever dealt with?
Carmen Policy, the 49ers, during their glory years.
The Bill Walsh era?
Yes, he was unbelievable, and it's all the best franchises.
But what made him so good?
First of all, he liked players, and the fact that you actually appreciated the players instead of resenting the players. What you had was a split between the old guard, which were people who had bought a franchise in football, and that's what they owned. And then you had new wave owners coming in who'd made $1 billion and bought teams at premium, and they had different points of view. So Ed DeBartolo and Carmen Policy liked players. They would hug them when they came off the field, and they really appreciated them. That feeling alone went into every negotiation, which is, instead of denigrating the talents, they might have been tough in terms of a price, but the point was, we're happy with what you've done. We think you're great. Now let's figure out what fair compensation is.
Halberstrom talks about that in Breaks of the Game, where he says one of the fundamental issues owners had with players in the NBA in the 70s was that they thought of their players as products rather than people.
Right, and players feel that, so that the fact is that personal touch, and not having it be a hostile process, having it be a win-win. My whole job is to make it not personal, to make it about enhancing the team. In other words, the focus has got to be on not what this is costing you, but what you gain on the other side, which is a Super Bowl roster.
And in your experience, which owners are generally more successful? The ones where the team is their operating business, or the ones where it's more of a hobby?
The ones where it's more of a hobby. Not a hobby, because make no mistake.
That denigrates it a bit, or underestimates it a bit.
But the ones who came out of the world of branding and marketing and the current market conditions and think of talent as a real plus, and can imagine new income streams and can get outside the square. And traditionally that was your 49ers and your Patriots and your Dallas Cowboys and the whole groups like that. Even Dan Snyder, before he started to have problems, when he came in, was imaginative in terms of how things went, and later all soured.
And you and him have something in common. You guys both built your empire from your parents' basement by their pool.
Right. Well, I love those for the first time when the Pat Bolins and Jerry Jones and Bob Kraft and owners like that came along. You could talk about imaginative ideas, and they would go for it, and they were not so closed to stuff.
So who do you think is the greatest owner in NFL history?
Bob Kraft.
You take him over Jerry.
Well, more Super Bowls. Look, the goal in football, because profits guaranteed, is to go to Super Bowl.
Now, Patrick Mahomes, your client, when you first signed him, did you have any idea that he would become the greatest quarterback in football?
So you had to think that he was going to be a great quarterback. What was stunning is how fast it happened. what was stunning is going out the very first year of starting and being MVP. How fast it happened was what was stunning, because normally in the progression of quarterbacks, the adjustment from being a backup to being a starter is huge. The adjustment from college to pros is huge. So the game is faster. The degree of separation is smaller. The players are much more talented. Pass you throw that in college is a touchdown pass is picked off in the pros. Right. And the game moves fast. So it has to slow down. So the fact of the matter is, you would assume that every year a quarterback plays, he'd be better and better.
So what trait does he have that allowed him to get good so quickly?
Pristine work ethic. In other words, real work ethic of study and all the rest of it. But most importantly, most games now come down to the fourth quarter or the last drive. Mm-hmm. So then the question is, what does someone do in adversity? You've thrown a couple interceptions, the game is getting away, it's coming down to the end. What happens now? Can that quarterback compartmentalize, adopt a quiet mind, tune out all extraneous input, and give himself the ability to elevate his level of play in critical circumstances to go to victory? And he has that, and the great quarterbacks do.
This is a touchy thing to get into, but I am curious. With Patrick Mahomes, he almost generates zero negative press, but there has been negative press around him because of the people around him. Is that something you help him work through, or do you just kind of follow his lead?
He's just naturally, he's brilliant. He's very wise. He's grounded, and he makes his decisions on how to live his life. You can learn a lot from him.
Can you give me a play-by-play on what you do when one of your athletes commits a crime?
So the first key is prevention. So the key is to try to avoid that situation. So you sit down at the beginning of a relationship with an athlete and you say, you understand you're playing a professional sport, that it's not bread and butter on the table, that it's not a mandatory transportation to work, that the only reason this exists is we have fans, and those fans spend money on tickets, and they watch on television and buy the products, and they buy memorabilia and everything. And so you are going to be held to a higher standard. And the first thing you have to think about is anything involving alcohol. So that it means when you go out, if you're going to go out and drink, you need to have a designated driver and someone with you. You go out to drink, you got to be able to avoid a fight in a bar, because some drunken person's going to come along and say, you're not so tough. You have to be able to avoid that. You cannot put your hands on another person in anger, especially a woman. You simply can't do it. And you got to have buy-in from the athlete on these things, that you're going to do planning and preparation to make sure these things don't happen. Now, once they do, so let's take a drunk driving. Once they do, the first question is that I have to ask is, does this athlete have a problem? Is he an alcoholic? Does he have a problem? Do we need treatment for him? But then you want to get out real quick in front of the press, wrap your arms around the facts, make sure you're not going to state anything that's untrue or later proves out to be contradictory. And then my advice to players is get out there and apologize as quickly as you can and state the fact that the standard is not getting behind the wheel with any alcohol in your system. And that you're regretful to your fans, you're regretful to the teammates, you're regretful to the team. Right. But most importantly, show you've taken some step that will prevent a regression to that behavior. I'm going to AA, I'm going to anger management, I'm doing this or that, but whatever, what, they're just words until you show that you're taking some activity to make sure this never happens again.
Right.
I had a client who struggled named Ryan Leaf. And Ryan Leaf was caught one day yelling at a reporter in a locker room. And players yell at reporters all the time. I mean, it's post-game, they're all heated up, everybody understands. But this was caught on camera. And it was such an intriguing piece of film that was shown over and over and over again. By the time you'd seen Ryan Leaf screaming at a reporter 30 times, your image wasn't that he had one bad day and one tough incident that he could apologize for. Mm-hmm. And you know, you can't allow that to happen. You better get, I'm not as concerned as what the legal consequences are from the drunk driving. I'm very concerned, A, for your health, so just make sure that's under control, and B, for the fact that you want to be a productive player.
So what did Ryan Leaf do after that incident?
Went into a shell and sort of felt like people were picking on him.
He thought the world was against him and he felt justified in kind of retreating.
Yes.
Which isn't wrong of him to feel that way. The world was picking on him.
Right.
And maybe unfairly, because we've all had incidents where we lost our cool.
So, without going into what I told a confidential client, you might make the assumption that in that situation I was heavily trying to use every technique that we could think of from, I'm not going to talk about him specifically, but in a case like that, we'd be using potentially analysts, psychiatrists, you know, whoever we could get to sort of get through the problem.
But do you feel like the press, by and large, treats athletes fairly or unfairly?
I think they treat athletes fairly. I think that we now have a world which is based on celebrity and based on gotcha. And so I think there's a whole cottage industry that news, by its definition, is anything aberrational. So dog bites man is not a story. Man bites dog is a story. So anything outside the norm is now covered in a newspaper. So it's drunk driving, it's fights, it's whatever negative. And that emphasis leaves out the perspective of the fact that the 95% of athletes who wake up with their own wife, treat their family well, go to the ballpark, give peak performance, sign autographs graciously, go out and work in charity. That's not a story, or has not been highlighted as a story.
So do you feel like you have like a school of instruction for athletes? Like when you look at some of your Hall of Fame quarterbacks, Warren Moon, Steve Young, Troy Aikman, one day Patrick Mahomes, they've all had relatively clean public lives. Do you attribute that at all to something that you gave them?
Well, first of all, the key I've had is to get the right clients. So there was something inherently more mature about a Troy Aikman, a Steve Young, a Warren Moon, Drew Bledsoe. These were people that I was looking for and trying to profile. Self-starters, people who understood the power of sports and everything. So left to their own, they would have been just fine. But obviously you have to talk about public behavior and incidents, and that would be a normal part of a discussion with a client.
What's the greatest football game of all time?
SC versus Alabama, that opened up the color line in the South.
And you inducted Warren Moon into the Hall of Fame.
I did.
Who is a black guy.
Yeah. But here's the thing. I grew up in a part of Los Angeles where my elementary school was right across the street from a federal aid housing project. So that meant that half the students I was going to school with were black and Latino and
you know how to mix it up with everyone. You're no stranger to handshakes.
Well, you grew up staying over at people's houses. Your friends, when as a child, were the people you hung out with were black and Latino. You had to be older to even understand what made that so different.
But you must feel good that historically you'll be remembered as someone who helped get black guys opportunities as a quarterback in the NFL.
Totally.
Because when you were representing Warren Moon, the NFL was not drafting black quarterbacks.
There was a real bias among certain groups of personnel. Not all, but certain groups. It said that a black did not have the intellectual capacity to occupy the so-called thinking positions on a football field.
Yeah.
Quarterback, center.
Yeah, that exists.
And no one ever spoke it. In other words, no one ever made an announcement, we don't want you as a quarterback to be black, but the action spoke louder. And the fact that during scouting, they tried to change Warren Moon's position. I had Guy Benjamin the same year. They weren't trying to change his position.
So when Patrick Mahomes won his Super Bowl, did you think of Warren?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I've thought of the fact that the biggest two MVPs in the league over these last years have been Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes. I thought about the fact that there was a black quarterback against a black quarterback in last year's Super Bowl. I remember how it was, and it's gratifying to see the way it is now. And more important probably is having backup black quarterbacks, because that just normalized it.
Right, because it's always like, there's always going to be a cream of the crop, someone who can penetrate whatever biases there are.
I mean, there was one Jackie Robinson, but the key was
when average professional athletes are able to exist along other average athletes regardless of their color.
Right.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, let's talk about, you were the inspiration for the movie Jerry Maguire, one of my favorite movies of all time. What was it like working with Cameron Crowe?
The best. He was. I did later movies, but nobody was ever quite like him. He called me in 1993 and said, "I'm doing a film based on a sports agent. I'd like to be a fly on the wall and be with you, and we'll show me your world, and so I can see about this." And I used to read Rolling Stones, so I used to read some of his rock commentaries.
Sure.
And I had seen a film that he wrote called Fast Times at Ridgemont High that I thought was one of the funniest things I ever thought.
And it takes place in an LA high school, and he went to high school in
LA.
LA.
He went underground in a high school. And they've got Sean Penn's greatest dramatic role as Spicoli, right? So I thought it was hilarious. And so I was up for it, and we started in '93, and he went with me to the league meetings out in Palm Desert where all the owners get together and the coaches, and I'm walking around a free agent named Tim McDonald. And so I'm introducing him to people, I'm telling him stories, he's sitting back and watching what I'm doing. And then we go back to the draft in 1993, and I have the first pick, who's Drew Bledsoe, and he watches that process. And then he flies up with me to the press conference that Bledsoe has to introduce him to the Boston market. And he comes to a series of games with me, and he spends time in my office, and comes to my Super Bowl party, and all the rest of it. And I told him stories, lots of stories. And then he went off and wrote a brilliant script, and it's his script and his characters. And then my next role as technical advisor was to, first of all, vet the script to make sure the willing suspension of disbelief that holds you in a motion picture didn't get broken. And then he assigned me like Cuba Gooding Jr., and I took him to the Arizona Super Bowl, and for a week he had to pretend he was a client. And he hung out with Amani Toomer and Desmond Howard, who were wide receivers.
Yeah, of course.
And I spent some time with some of the other actors, putting them in role, just what the concept would be, what would be in your head. And they came and took my legal pads and clothes and all that and replicated it in that office shot out of his view from our offices in Newport Beach. And I agreed with Cameron that whatever I shared with him, I wouldn't share with the world. So it's not my biographical story, but it's got a lot of life on there.
Did having a film of that success that was inspired by your life, change the way you lived afterwards? Like, did the character of Jerry Maguire influence the real Leigh Steinberg at all?
No, because I've always seen there's being two worlds. There's out there, which is the public world, and then there's you and I, which is just
You and I.
real. And so it didn't, but it certainly raised my profile quite a bit, and it certainly created a situation where I would walk into an airport, still to this day, it's 26 years later, I walk into an airport, or I go out to dinner and someone runs up to the table and either asks me to say 4 words or says them to me that start with, "Show me the..."
So you were not you don't feel beholden to the character of Jerry Maguire?
I think it's really good that it humanized sports agents.
Were you excited that Tom Cruise played you?
I thought that was sort of cool. There was one, because he was sort of the hottest box office star in the country then, but there came one time where they had written a scene for me in the bachelor party scene where I give originally I was supposed to play his brother, but we went on vacation when they were shooting that. So there's one scene in the bachelor party scene where they
show the video of all the gals?
No, they gave me some lines to say that were sort of mean to him and were a cut on him. And Cruise walked over to me on the set and said, "You look uncomfortable." I said, "Tom, you're the biggest box office star in the country. People believe what's in movies is real. I am not going to play myself doing a nasty toast to you on your wedding. I wouldn't do that in real life. I'm not doing it." So I didn't do the scene.
That's crazy. Yeah, why are adult people not able to differentiate between the presentation of a person and the real person?
I don't know.
It drives me nuts. Okay, and then you also worked on Any Given Sunday. What was it like working with Oliver Stone?
It was fun. He was very innovative. I got to spend an evening with Al Pacino and put him into character. I was in the locker room scene.
When he gives the inches speech?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was interesting because, I didn't know. I had been through Jerry Maguire, so I had seen Renee Zellweger and Cruise and Cuba Gooding and Kelly Preston and all those folks. But still, Al Pacino probably meant more than all of them to me because, I thought he was a great actor. And he didn't know a lot about football. He knew a lot about boxing. But he was sitting in the locker room, wedged up against the wall, totally into himself. And I'm like, how is that person going to give this stirring locker room speech? But that was his preparation. And so it was really, so I'm like, okay, you got to pop the shoulder pads. Here's the way it really looks in the locker room. But anyway, yeah, I was there for that speech.
It was one of for me, the greatest inspirational speech probably in the history of not just sports movies, but movies, period.
So I did the same thing. I was technical advisor. I vetted the script and tried to make sure it's real. Like in Jerry Maguire, everything is more or less real except when he gets knocked out in a game, Cuba Gooding Jr., Rod Tidwell, and then he jumps up 2 seconds later. Now that is...
And that the refs and the crowd and everybody gives him space to just break dance.
That wasn't real, but...
You know what, TV, get the hell out of my house. Do you think Tom Cruise could have been a good running back?
I think Tom Cruise could probably have done anything in his life. Tom Cruise is sort of like Peyton Manning. They have indomitable will and discipline. I think he could have done anything he wanted to do.
How quickly could you see that in Tom Cruise?
First time I ever met him. I mean, he's an alpha male.
What is he doing that gives that energy off? I want some.
It's how he talks, how he gestures, how the intensity of his stare.
All right, I'm giving you some now. You feeling it? It's a little doughy. Whatever. What makes someone a good negotiator?
Research, clarity as to what goals they're trying to achieve. So on that list of things that you're trying to achieve, whether it's total amount of money, guarantees, length, whatever it would be, you need to prioritize and have your client prioritize what really is most critical for him. And something's got to be more important than something else, okay? And then it's laying out a really solid theory and foundation for why you're asking for what you're asking. In other words, don't insult the other side by saying, we want this and we want it because we want it. You're going to have to show them through comparable players, other situations, statistics, why this theory for compensation works. So I'm a concept negotiator. If I can convince you that this is the right way to think about the situation, then the economics will flow.
When you're in a negotiation, it seems to me you look at the other side as your friend rather than your foe.
We do repetitive business. So just think of it as a field where in baseball or basketball, the same 30 general managers are going to come around again and again and again. In football, the same 32 teams are going to come around again and again. You'll do multiple deals with the same teams.
Right.
So everything's verbal. Everything is about relationships. And you have to have consideration to the other side. I'll give you an example. So you and I agree you're the general manager and we agree to a contract that's got $10 million and a $1.1 million bonus or something. And the contract shows up and it's got a $1.4 million bonus in it. That's just the way it's written. You don't just have your client sign it. You didn't agree to 1.4, you agreed to 1.1. And that person's going to be in serious trouble if you go ahead and execute the contract who's on the other side. You might make a mistake yourself. And the only thing for sure is if you have your foot on someone's neck that is exposed and you press down on it when you don't need to, your neck will be exposed at some point.
They're going to do the same to you.
Yes. Another thing in negotiating is, for God's sakes, never lie. When you misstate something that you know to be untrue, don't do that ever, because the temptation is to get out of a difficult situation, maybe by stretching the truth or something, but then you have to live with the consequences. And the truth, if you just have one truth for everybody,
simplifies things.
You don't have to remember what you told person A or B or C, but you'll destroy yourself. So a client calls you, says, I've been trying to get a hold of you. So the agent feels tempted to say, well, I called you back. The player can live past the point where you weren't so quick to call him back. If you're honest, I'm sorry, I should have done that. But if you tell him a lie, he'll know, and that ends the relationship.
Right.
Because once you know someone has the capacity to dissemble, that's it.
But are you honest all the time?
I try to live every day, and at the end of every day I think, did I harm somebody today? Did I hurt somebody's feelings? Was I less than honest? Or which would be mostly by withholding, not by consciously lying. And I try to judge myself every day and make sure that I'm accountable.
And you're aware that you have a persona that is how the public interprets you. And it seems to me like you're trying to keep the gap between who you actually are and that persona as small as possible.
Yes. I don't internalize newspaper clippings and press and stuff like that. That's not who I am. That is a public representation, but it's
and
not.
there is a part of you that likes that.
Who am I? Because I think if you believe in the values you believe in and think that they're helpful to people, yes, you'd like them to spread.
Right.
So, for example, on education, I've created these agent academies where we're training the next generation. Would I like to have people in sports that are honest, ethical, and know how to make a difference positively? Yep, I would. And so, am I abashed about taking athletes' good achievements and pushing them? No, because there's so much negative out there. I think we need to provide people models and stuff.
And it seems like for you, one of the biggest pathways to change is like visual indoctrination.
So I think that you can't lecture to people, that people will turn off lectures, that you have to use the tools of popular culture.
And so you look at athletes, because of their visibility, because of their courage, because of their strength, as almost these demigods that can be used as vessels for philosophy and ideology and for change.
I think so. Now, obviously, but that's my orientation.
No, but I think that's cool that you look at it in such like a kind of mythopoetic way where you're like, no, you're not just a quarterback. The quarterback means something in American culture.
I saw the very first time with Steve Bartkowski. The revelation was arriving at the Atlanta airport and having Klieg lights flashing in the sky like for a movie premiere, and having this crowd pressed up against a police line waiting for Bartkowski, and interrupting the Johnny Carson show, the late entertainment show,
yeah, of course,
to bring a special news bulletin. And I'm like, whoa, what is this? In California we love sports, but Berkeley we were a little laid back, and in LA, we'd leave sex early to avoid the traffic, right? The point is, I saw this and I was mind-boggled.
Yeah, and then you're like this active young person who's working in like youth government at Berkeley, and then you see this athlete and you see the power of amplification that they have. And then
there was like a 50-foot high billboard on BART that for Bartkowski it said Peachtree BART, and there was another massive sign that said the Golden Pole, and I'm like, whoa! And going to Football Crazy Atlanta, I saw the centrality that this.
Yeah, because California, we're just not as deep as sports fans here.
Yeah, I think we're good, but I think we're loyal. But
we don't compare to the South or to the Northeast.
Am I going to die if the Dodgers don't win the World Series? No, I'll feel bad, but I'm not going to die.
Yeah, so that's cool. So do you ever? And I know you have so much respect for athletes in all aspects. But do you ever feel like a little bit like Cyrano de Bergerac, like kind of implementing this world conscious philosophy into them and having them spread it out?
Well, first of all, I realized very early I couldn't force them into a choice about being a role model or focusing on second career, the rest of it, if I couldn't deliver the best contracts. So I understood technically it was too much to ask someone at 21 to choose between good person, big contract. So I had to be technically skilled. But the biggest crisis of conscience I ever had was over the issue of head injury and concussion. And I had a real crisis of conscience and debated, do I stay in a business where some percentage of the people are going to go down the road to dementia and chronic traumatic encephalopathy.
And how did you work your way through that?
By doing concussion conferences and by thinking, I care about this issue. We can get the best minds in America working on prevention, awareness, and cure. And let's continually have conferences. Let's continually make sure the athletes are educated. So the first conference had, had Steve Young and Warren Moon and Troy Aikman and a bunch of the players.
And Aikman had a lot of trouble with concussions.
Right. So the point was, but you can't exist in this system and not acknowledge this and not raise, questions and see if we can find a way out of it. And today, there's a process called TMS that can restore a concussed brain, that through the concept of neuroplasticity can actually rewire the neurons.
Where are they doing that?
All over. You have practitioners all over California, all around the world. It's called TMS. It's magnets against the brain. There's another. So what I did years ago is I said, how can I help athletes give peak performance in key situations? In other words, if the games are going to come down to 4 quarters, there's something that can happen. And then how do we get players back to service quicker? And then how do we retain players' brains? And so I went looking, and I went and found hyperbaric oxygen and stem cells and blue, white, and red light and Nanovi and Bimini and a variety of different concepts that we can integrate into sports that are all based on the biomed revolution, the fact that we are quickly revamping any concept of medicine and replacing it with this preventative model, and people are going to live longer and all the rest.
I mean, was that something with concussions? Did you know that was going to be an issue before it became a public health issue?
Yes, because I kept seeing my players get hit in the head, and we'd go to doctors and ask them how many concussions is too many, when should I think about retiring, what are the long-term consequences? They didn't have any answers.
Pretty vague.
Right, and so, because the brain's the last frontier of medical research. So I knew that we needed to press on it, because I called it a ticking time bomb and an undiagnosed health epidemic. And I needed to keep having these conferences, keep looking, is there prevention? Is there cure? Is there, and it's gotten better.
But were you still negotiating contracts for players after they'd had several concussions?
Yes, because it was a learning process for me. And the more I knew and the more I understood, the more I started bringing it up as a topic. Remember, it wasn't a popular topic. The league denied there was any connection.
No, and there used to be a sense of humor around it almost. It
oh
was
my
like,
God,
oh, he got his bell rung. Or like when Brett Favre threw that touchdown and didn't remember.
Knocked him to the moon,
yeah.
Whoa.
No, the seriousness of it didn't get to any of us until...
No, but it's the brain. And so unlike every other joint in the human body, you have the expectation as a player that when your career ends, you're probably going to have aches and pains in your joints. Maybe not be able to lean over and pick up your child at 50 so easily. But it's another thing not to recognize that child. The brain is the center of, makes us a sentient being as opposed to, No,
that's our humanity.
Right. It's your memory, your character.
Your identity.
And so this has to be treated at a higher level of urgency than anything else.
Do you feel like you'll always be watching those guys?
That?
Like the guys who played football and wrist injury and had the hits on the head, do you think... Is there a stress that comes with that where you're like, oh, I'm still waiting to see what happens? No, complicit for sure, but then like, how do you deal with that complicit part? Like, how do you make yourself feel morally rectified in that as you go forward?
By
The remedies.
exposing these players to RTMS and hyperbaric oxygen and stem cell and the variety of healing. And the most painful thing I did in a way was in 2006, I had the honor of presenting Warren Moon at the Hall of Fame when he was inducted.
I love this story in your book, by the way.
But anyway, the one of the things that happens is they put jackets on these players, and all the ex-members of the Hall of Fame have to walk up a slightly slanted set of stairs to get to the onto the stage. It's painful watching them walk.
Yeah.
And they'd all do it again, but it is painful to see how beaten up some of these people are. Now you ask them, do you regret it? No, I do it again, but it's frightening.
What do you think are the positive aspects of having CTE?
None. It's oblivion.
When you were single, although you met your first wife Lucy very early in life, right? Like around college.
I met her in college, but we didn't get married for 15 years.
Well, so even on like a flirting level, were you also careful to never show up one of your clients in front of a woman?
I'm careful to not show up any friend of mine in front of a third party.
Right, respect.
I never, if I wanted to discipline my kids, I'd pull them aside. I wouldn't even do it in front of their brothers and sisters.
But I mean, if you were with one of your athletes and you had better rhythm with a woman, could that affect their confidence?
No, but it might affect my relationship. Here's the way I feel about that. If any man who is your friend expresses any interest in any woman, off limits for me.
That's what's up. That's why you're a guy's guy. That's why you're a dude's dude. That's why you're in the line of work you're in, because you understand the code.
Not happening. Not happening.
You look out for your guys.
There's 1 billion women in the world. Why would I have to occupy myself with someone that's going to put distance in my relationship with another man?
This is why your clients trust you. This is why you sustained a career in sports agenting for over 45 years.
I'm not doing that. You
55
know, it
years.
was 50 this draft.
50 years of being a successful sports agent in a cutthroat business, and you've managed to maintain a relatively clean soul. Well done.
Thank you, sir.